Good evening. On behalf of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Australia and New Zealand section, I'd like to extend a big welcome to the third of 6 events of 2019, focusing on multimodal traffic impacts and planning. My name is Michael Plant, and I'm a committee member with ITE-ANZ. I'm also joined tonight by Danielle Rebecki and also Daniel Gashi, who have prepared tonight's event. We're honoured to have 4 subject matter experts speak this evening from academia and industry, who offer their perspectives on a topic which is significantly impacting how Melbourne grows in an ever-increasing population. Before we immerse ourselves in the presentation, I wish to cover a few housekeeping items. Safety is our #1 priority. We have exits through the door, 2 stairwells that lead you down to the ground floor. We also have restrooms available over here. Next, an important aspect is welcome to country. I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on today. Here in Melbourne, I'm on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation and would like to acknowledge both the Wurundjeri and Burrung peoples. I pay my respects to elders, past and future. Next, I'd like to thank PwC for making this venue available for us this evening. And I would like to welcome and bring to the stage Mr. Dan Brown, Director of PwC, to say a few words. Dan.
If I can control this. I'd just like to echo my welcome to you tonight. It's really, PwC really pleased to be able to host an event like this with such a large number of people from the industry. Some of you are probably wondering why is PwC interested in ITE? And you know, I know that it was a surprise to a number of people even in ITE themselves. Here at PwC, we sort of started our transport modelling, strategic transport modelling business about 3 years ago. And we really saw, PwC saw, and tonight we have partner Darren in the room, who saw it as an opportunity involved in big business cases, involved in infrastructure more generally, that there was a real gap there to provide that sort of holistic whole project sort of advice. So I just wanted to touch really briefly on what we do. You're not going to necessarily going to read all that slide, but I just wanted to really talk about our strategic transport team. We are involved in that sort of whole multimodal approach. So we're involved in sort of road, rail, bus, aviation, freight, and also that's sort of the land use and urban renewal focus. So if you look at the little map of Australia, there's an example of some of the projects we've been working on up and down the eastern seaboard and also over in Perth. Here in Melbourne, we worked on a small project called Suburban Rail Loop, I'm sure some of you might have heard about. Where that was a great opportunity for us to really work on such a large sort of city-changing infrastructure project. So there's a number of our clients there all across the country. And then finally, I just thought just to give you a sense of how invested we actually are in this area. And this is most of our team, not quite everyone is up there, but we have over 20 strategic transport modellers, mesoscopic modellers, microscopic modellers, across the whole of the East Coast. A number of these people are here in the room today. We've got Darren, Dave, Janice are in the room, Harren as well, I think, somewhere. So we've got quite a depth of team ready to work on any number of projects. And as I said, number of us are here tonight, so come and grab us afterwards and have a chat. We'd be pleased to talk more about what we do and our experience. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Great, thanks for that, Dan. My name is Daniel Gash, as Michael mentioned. I'm one of the ITE-ANZ committee members. And just a few other, announcements from ITE. So for those of you who don't know much about the ITE, ITE is an international educational and scientific association. and our aim is to bring people together to exchange information and develop the profession. ITE is based in the USA and has about 15,000 members across 90 countries. And Australia and New Zealand formed a joint section which is based in Melbourne, and we really encourage new members. So feel free to chat to myself or Michael or Danielle or any of the other ITE members here. Feel free to chat to us and we can tell you a bit more about some of the things we're involved in. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. Without whose financial assistance, we wouldn't be able to bring these seminars to you free of charge in some of these great venues. So one of the other things that ITE does is they have the ITE-ANZ Traffic worldwide learning opportunities. So as part of this, Traffic have extended their generous sponsorship to enable ITE-ANZ to offer financial support to one young member to attend the ITE annual meeting and conference in the USA. And the aim is to contribute to their personal and professional development. So we've sent quite a few people recently, which has been great. And just recently we've also got Danielle Rebecki, who'll come up a little bit later. And she'll be attending this meeting in Austin in Texas, and she'll have the opportunity to interact and learn from other young transport professionals. This is a really great opportunity provided by Oz Traffic, and I encourage everyone to keep an eye out for future opportunities in this space. So now I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's just going to talk a little bit about the Young Members Committee.
Afternoon, everyone. So just as a bit of an introduction, we now have a Young Members Committee as part of the ITE-ANZ. It's actually one of the first of its kind for the whole of ITE. So there's a number of student chapters all across North America, but we also have a few university chapters starting here in Australia and one in Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand as well. But just last month we've now nominated a committee, held our first meeting, and we're looking to bring some exciting content and pairing with the senior body itself to kind of focus more on the younger members as well within both the Australian and New Zealand network. And as part of that, I encourage you to head along to the LinkedIn and Facebook pages as well, because it's a great opportunity to stay connected with what the ITE-ANZ is doing both at the senior level and with the Young Members Committee. And we'll also have a fancy new name at some point in the future for the Young Members Committee too. Yeah, I encourage you to join up on the socials. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, really exciting what that group's doing, so definitely encourage you to follow that. We'll put it on at the end of the seminar today, so you can go up there and search them up. That would be great. So we're going to start in a moment, so if I could ask that you either silence or turn your devices off, that would be really good. So we've got four speakers, two of them will co-present tonight. And we'll have a few questions at the end, and then at the very end of the seminar, depending on how we're going for time, we'll open them up for a panel and a bit of just open questions from the floor. So I will introduce you to Danielle, who's going to tell you who our next speaker is.
Hi everyone. So our first speaker for this evening is Mr. Chris de Gruyter. So Chris is a Vice-Chancellor's Research Fellow in the Centre for Urban Research at RMIT. He's currently undertaking a 4-year research project that is exploring the impacts of new development on public transport. Prior to joining RMIT University, Chris was a Research Fellow and Deputy Director in the Public Transport Research Group at Monash University. And he also worked in transport planning for 12 years, both within Victorian Government and consulting. In 2015, Chris received the Emerging Transport Professional of the Year Award from the ITE-ANZ. Chris's presentation will look at how research over the last 30 to 40 years has accommodated multi-modal transport considerations in trip generation studies for land use development. So please join me in welcoming Chris.
Thanks, Danielle.
Is it okay if I speak out here? I'll try to speak loudly so you can hear. This research I did last year when I started at RMIT, and it's something I've been wanting to look at for quite some time. How are different modes of transport considered in trip generation studies that are done for land use developments? The structure of this presentation, I'll talk through some background to the research, but then get into the results. And the results comprise three main parts. So I'll talk about methods that are being used to estimate multimodal trip generation rates from land use developments, and then talk about some of the key issues associated with using these rates and applying them, and then some directions for the future. A lot of this is based on what the literature says, so it's based on what research studies have said about it. It's only in the last bit where I'll give my own opinion, my own perspective on it. So as many of us know here, trip generation rates are a key part of transport impact assessments for new land use development. They help us estimate what the scale of transport impacts are going to be and what the measures that might be appropriate for managing those impacts are. However, if we are to solely focus on vehicle trips, this can often lead to inadequate provision of infrastructure for other modes, walking and public transport. And then that obviously has flow-on effects to livability, health, environmental outcomes. And some researchers, particularly those in the US, have identified that this has led to an over-provision of motor vehicle infrastructure in some cities, this approach. In Australia, best practice is suggesting that we need to consider all transport modes in these assessments, and there's certainly evidence of that happening, which is good. But where my research came in is that there wasn't really any international review of this topic that had been done, so I wanted to look at this in more detail. So the aim of this research was to provide a synthesis of international research that looked at multimodal trip generation rates. I want to look at methods that have been used to estimate these trip generation rates, look at current and past practice in the field over the last 30 to 40 years, which is as far as the literature really went to anyway, that I could get my hands on. Look at issues with applying these rates and estimating them, and then what the directions for the future might be. And the way I did this was reviewing publications in the field. So these were predominantly research publications, but some industry publications that were available. There was a total of 153 that were reviewed for this bit of research, and it was published this year in a journal. And then we also had a piece in you've heard of The Conversation. It's an online outlet, mostly academics publish in it, but they're more sort of shorter versions of articles in some cases, a bit more digestible. So an article came out just about a month ago, a shortened version of this work. So now I'll talk about the actual results from the research. So the literature suggests that there's 6 main methods to estimate multimodal trip generation rates. The first being vehicle counts, either manually or automatic. But the key disadvantage here is that we don't know how many trips are made by other transport modes. So we need to use other methods in conjunction with these vehicle counts. And that's where person counts and intercept surveys are coming. So person counts where you're just observing from a building, people going in and out, and in some cases you might be able to gauge what mode of transport they're using. A bit difficult with public transport, but if a public transport stop is close by, you can often do that. But it's really intercept surveys that have been used to get an understanding of what transport mode people are using by actually asking them as they go in and out of the building. And the benefit of these intercept surveys is that we can get unobserved information like socio-demographics, also get information on trip purpose and this kind of thing, which has a huge influence on trip generation. So it's a good opportunity to collect that other information at the same time. Certainly costs a lot more though to do this, and you're only getting a sample because you can't interview every single person that goes in and out of the building. So you often need this person count to factor up the results. Two other methods that have been identified in the literature are household travel surveys and workplace or school travel surveys for getting trip generation rates. And certainly they have their advantages and limitations also. But workplace and school travel surveys, you generally get a pretty good response rate for those, but the disadvantage is that they of course only apply to certain land uses. So 6 main methods that were identified. And in terms of how frequently they were used, this is something I was interested in. No. Vehicle counts certainly used a lot of the time. And the studies that I reviewed for this research showed that manual vehicle counts have been used slightly more than automatic counts. But in recent years, in the last sort of 10 years or so, we're starting to see a rise in the use of other methods. Okay, so these household travel surveys being used, person counts, intercept surveys. And that's coincided with the collection of data for other modes. So there's been a lot more interest now in getting trip generation rates for public transport, for walking, and for cycling. And you certainly see a rise there, but it's still only about 30 to 40% of the studies that have been done. And I think it was 97% collected data on vehicle trips. So vehicle trips is certainly the predominant focus so far. And often in practice, we use trip generation rates that are already out there, surveyed at other sites or in databases. A lot of consultants will have their own databases. But there are 3 main ones commercially available, and I just want to provide a summary of those. The first being the ITE trip generation database. It's been around for a long time, a lot of sites in there. It's something that I don't think is used enough is this TRIPS database from the UK and Ireland. This has over 5,000 sites and a lot of multimodal data in it. Very useful database. And then in Australasia and New Zealand, we've got TRIPS Database Bureau database, which has been around for 15 years or so, or close to 20 years. And that's got about 1,000 sites in it, and about a third of those have multimodal data. But it is still somewhat limited. Some of the sites are getting pretty old when the data was collected. If we look at the number of multimodal sites in these databases, ITE does have technically about 9% of sites being multimodal, but it's really only person counts that are done those sites that you can get data for. So getting data by each transport mode, you can't do that. I don't think from the ITE database very easily. And at the site level, the ITE database is somewhat limited, and the next presentation by Kristie Currans, she'll probably talk about this a lot more, but it is limited in terms of what we can get out at a site level. The TRIPS database and the TDB database can actually look at individual sites. It even has a site address, so you can look right at the level of detail that you need and pick out the sites that are closest to your development, as opposed to ITE where it's more in an aggregated format. So that's a bit of an overview of, I suppose, current and past practice in the area and some of the methods that have been identified for collecting this sort of data. I now want to talk about the issues that have arisen with collecting or estimating and applying multimodal trip generation rates. The first is that we just don't have enough of this data. A third of those sites in the TDB database and the TRIPS database are multimodal, but when you start looking at specific locations where your development is, the sample starts to reduce, or what you can use starts to reduce. So there is a limited amount of data. Consultants aren't necessarily incentivised to share their data with these databases very much, so it does limit what goes into them. The second issue being that if we're collecting data on multimodal trip generation rates, it's it's a lot more complex. Yeah, and it's a lot more resource intensive. You need people to go out and ask people, how did you get here, what mode of transport are you using to leave the building, these kind of things. So higher cost. Can't necessarily do it through observation alone or just laying a tube to count vehicles. The third one being that despite all this best practice recommendations around what we should be doing, there still is a continued focus on vehicle trips in a lot of transport impact assessment. The fourth one is around sample size. So for some sites where public transport or cycling trips might comprise a small proportion of total trips, you generally need to survey them for longer so you can get a reasonable level of accuracy in trip generation rate. Otherwise you're going to have a really small sample that you base on trip generation rate. And the fifth issue that was identified, these are all issues identified in the literature, I should say. The fifth issue identified was this one around site context, and I think this is a really important one. That there's so many factors that can affect these estimates, and if we just present one single figure, then there's going to be so much variation around that. And I have an example of this based on some data I collected a few years ago at apartment buildings. So the y-axis in this graph indicates the number of vehicle trips in the AMP tower per dwelling. So these are apartment buildings. And published rates that are out there. So in the ITE manual, the closest main use for apartments in high-density locations suggests that there's 0.34 trips per dwelling in the AMP tower. Vehicle trips, talking about. And in New South Wales, we've got a couple of trip generation rates that are published, the RTA and RMS rates that are around the 0.2 to 0.5 mark for apartment buildings. So considerably lower than that ITE rate. But then when we look at the data, so when we did these surveys a few years ago, now these are at 9 different apartment buildings. The first one was somewhat, and the second one actually, was somewhat within that range of that RTA and RMS rate. But then, as we keep going, these going descending order, you get all the way down to here. So you get a minimum of about 0.12, okay, and a maximum of 0.26. Now, the interesting thing here is that that first apartment building is located about 100 metres away from the last apartment building. Right? So they've got the same transport network. So if we don't take into account those other factors, demographics, parking provision, these have completely different parking provision. Yeah, these buildings. If we don't have information on that, and we're just saying, okay, apartment buildings in inner city areas, we're going to get some pretty extreme variation. On average, the rate was around 0.17 vehicle trips per dwelling, and interestingly, that's about half of the ITE rate, about 50%. So lots of variation there. The other thing I wanted to mention was the actual percentage of trips we're actually talking about at these sites. This is certainly not all sites, but at these apartment buildings that were, most of them were located sort of within 5 k's of Melbourne CBD. The first one, this is the highest, had about 45% trips going in and out by car. Yeah, the rest by other modes, like 55% by other transport modes. And we keep going down. 10% was the lowest. Anyone, I don't know if you can see that very easily. Anyone know what that building is?
That one next to the station that has the car space.
That one. So it's next to ANZ Station on the upfield line. What's it called? Oh, not Nightingale. Commons. Yeah, the Commons. So I stood out in front of that surveying that. It doesn't have any on-site car parking. But it still had vehicle trips. But all the vehicle trips made to and from this building were either people visiting the cafe was downstairs. So technically I should have excluded them because this was a rate for, this was looking at trips generated by residents. But the other trips were trips by tradies that were doing some work on the building. So it wasn't actually the residents at all, it was others. So, but 10% is pretty low. And when you look at the transport impact assessments that were written for quite a few of these buildings, the actual focus is really on the vehicle trips. And there's very little on what are we doing about public transport, walking and cycling, in a more of a meaningful way. So the level of analysis that is done for vehicle trips in the assessments for some of these buildings was generally much more sophisticated than it was for other transport modes. There wasn't any quantitative assessment of public transport trips coming out of these buildings, when in fact public transport, walking and cycling trips constituted the majority of the trips. And they're located in areas where public transport is already operating close to capacity or at capacity in the peak. So the average was around, less than a third of all trips from these dwellings were car trips. So my last bit is drawing all this together and more my view on this, about what could be some key directions in this area. And the first is that, and this is supported by the research literature too, a lot of people are saying we actually need to have a fundamental change in what we're doing. We need to consistently account for multi-modal trip generation for land use developments. And a big part of that is our guidelines. So in Australia, our guidelines don't do a lot around this. There are some pretty good best practice elements in our guidelines. We've got state and national guidelines. But there's certainly more that could be said about estimating trip generation by for new development. And actually comparing that to the capacity of the network, particularly for public transport. The second one is that these trip generation databases are pretty much operating independently, but more just last year or this year, TDV and TRIG, so the UK one and the Australasian one, joined forces. So they now have their databases in the same online facility. The rates aren't combined, but there is potential to combine the rates. There was a study done that looked at vehicle trip generation rates in Australia and the UK, and they weren't all that different for some land uses. So it means if we have an international database, we can start to borrow rates from elsewhere if we're not seeing large differences. And that certainly increases our sample size a lot. And the last point, there is so much variability that using a single figure is probably never going to be correct. If we use an average, 50% of sites that were based on that average are going to be higher, 50% are going to be lower. So there is, I think, some merit in some scenario planning and sensitivity testing, and there's using more of a range rather than a single figure perhaps. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. So maybe if you want to set up, and if we've got any, maybe have 2 or 3 questions, and then we've got a voting mic here. So anyone else first?
If you'd just like to state your name, please, and where you're from.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you.
My name is Conrad, I'm from WSP. Firstly, thank you, Chris, for the presentation. Really interesting. I saw the article on the conversation initially. It is worth a read for anyone who wants more written overview. So on the summary points at the end, so the first point about there needs to be more of a paradigm, I definitely agree with that. There is, if I'm not mistaken, in the planning scheme, there is a statutory referral arrangement for sites if they're over a certain intensity of certain land uses, so it's not everything, that they should be referred to the relevant authorities. So if it's a shopping centre or something over a certain size, I think it is supposed to be referred to the public transport network. I'm not sure if that happens all the time. That's my first question. The second question, which is a little bit related. So I did this one time in Sydney. We had a project. It was a government land, and the statutory requirements was such a. We actually negotiated with the Transport for New South Wales about what the scope should be for the transport assessment, and they said you should look at what the if there's capacity on the public transport network for this site. It was in a city, so it was close to a Redfern station. We did look at it. We didn't spend hundreds and hundreds of man hours looking at it, but we did. I think had a good look at it. But it was very difficult. The trains were so crowded, and there's so much people getting on and off that it was just very difficult to come up with a clear sort of recommendation, I suppose. There was other things we were able to say though, such as station access and those sorts of things, which I think Transport for New South Wales did appreciate. But overall, I would say we did do that. Point number one. We applied that, and it was successful, I think. So I would definitely, if you need more information about what we did, it was successful, but it was very, very tricky. But in relation to the first point about the statutory referral, do you have any knowledge about that? Is it often?
Not really, but as far as I'm aware, there's not a requirement to quantitatively assess how many trips.
No, it's just a referral, and then
it's going to be undertaken by ANZ Transport.
It'd then be for the Public Transport Authority or whoever, to then say what they want to see done and not done.
Department of Transport now.
Department of Transport now. Yeah.
And they're actually quite, the planning referrals team in Department of Transport are quite interested in this idea. I think our guidelines are still an issue though. Our guidelines don't say to do this. So that's, to me, that's a logical part of it. We've got national off-road guidelines, transport impact assessment, and some states have guidelines of their own. I think Western Australia are probably pretty good. Queensland, I think, is still, a bit based on past practice more. And we don't have, as far as I'm aware, we don't have Victoria ones. There's one wants to say otherwise, but Victoria did have something a while ago, but we don't, as far as I'm aware, we don't have Victoria guidelines, so that would be, I think that'd be a good place to start. Yep.
I agree.
Cool, thanks for that. Do we have any other questions for that?
I can go with that speaker. Have you given any thought to what kind of outcomes you want to see if there wasn't that much? So when you're doing a TIA, a lot of the outcomes are, say, on Big Rose Road, you put some tracks in the what kind of outcomes would you like to see if developments that say pushing public transport network over the edge or bike path capacity?
Well, some investment towards those nodes, I think, would be a logical thing to do. It's a difficult one because state responsibility for public transport. Other modes, for roads, intersection upgrades. It is different. So I think there's some inherent challenges in all of this. Absolutely. I've seen some examples where developers contribute towards public transport upgrades. But I do question whether it's enough. The big Honeywell site on Victoria Street, I think Hampton, the developer for that, contributed $50,000 towards a public transport stop upgrade, train stop upgrade, which is really positive. But is that going to really, compensating for hundreds of trips that are going to be generated by the public transport network? So, yeah. I think it's a good, good step in the right direction. Yeah.
Great, thanks Chris. Why don't we give him a hand and so our next speaker will actually she's prepared a video presentation for us because she is Kristie Currans, an assistant professor of planning from the University of Arizona. So her title is Kristie and Currans Assistant Professor, School of Landscape Architecture and Planning at the University of Arizona. Kristina has nearly 10 years of experience studying and developing data and methods supporting transportation impact analysis. After receiving a PhD in civil engineering from Portland State University, Oregon, USA in 2017, she aims to link academic theories into practice by providing agencies and practitioners with tools that provide sensitivity to the diverse planning objectives and goals. She is also the co-owner of Clifton/Currans LLC, a firm dedicated to working with agencies and practitioners interested in incorporating her research into practice. Recently, her paper, Improving Transportation Impact Analysis for Affordable Housing Developments, a data collection and analysis of trip generation data, won a Best Paper Award from the Standing Committee on Transport and Land Development at the Transport Research Board annual meeting. So I'll play that video now.
Hello, I'm Christina Currans. I'm from the University of Arizona at the US. I'm going to be talking to you today about recent updates and findings in trip generation from the US. Before I begin my presentation, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I'm an assistant professor of urban planning at University of Arizona, and my background is in civil engineering. The majority of my work is really looking at that intersection between land use development and transportation impacts and use, with 70 to 80% of my work revolving around ITE's trip generation and similar methods, really looking at how we can bridge theory into practice and encourage multimodal evaluation of land use development. I've also contributed to ITE's trip generation handbook and manual, as well as their parking generation manual. I'm going to be talking to you mostly today about the trip generation handbook and manual, looking at some major things that have changed and some of the research that we're seeing now, which helps guide our understanding of these changes and what they can do for us moving forward. So the number one change that happened in the trip generation handbook was a shift in thinking away from vehicle trips to thinking about people. So this was really driven by several studies funded by state DOTs and metropolitan and city agencies, looking at encouraging moving beyond vehicle evaluation and level of service. So thinking about all the different ways in which people are using the transportation network to get to different land uses and activities, and working to link those to other planning objectives and goals related to health and safety, equity, sustainability, and so on. From a researcher's perspective, a lot of the changes driven in these studies have been aimed at integrating all of the new knowledge we have in the travel behavior arena that have integrated a lot of economic theory and psychology theory into understanding behavior. ITE's methods have largely been unchanged since the 60s or 70s, so this shift in thinking about people is kind of a massive one. Many recent studies have incorporated a lot of this person-based multimodal evaluation. Another major element that came out of this was really a focus on urban development and understanding variation in trip rates across urban environments. And there have been quite a few studies where many of these, the data are available either online or by request. And ITE has captured quite a bit of this, most of this, and incorporated that into the 10th edition. For those areas, land uses, contexts in which we don't have a lot of information, we haven't collected new data, ITE's 3rd edition handbook have provided sort of a stopgap approach. This approach takes ITE's baseline vehicle trip information. So the baseline sites are usually just conventional vehicle travel information from suburban areas. And we make some assumptions to convert those vehicle trips into person trips, and then those person trips back into context-specific modal trips. I'll give you the slides so you can take a closer look at these equations and how they relate. This is also in the 3rd edition handbook. The benefit here is that we don't have to collect all the data we need in order to start evaluating sites multimodally. We give some guidance for how you could start to do that today. But there is some question about whether this is the appropriate approach. For example, we have on the very left-hand side, we have sort of the state of practice thinking about, despite the fact you might change urban context, you might go to downtown areas, to suburban areas, main street corridors, and so on. We're sort of assuming that all of the person trips are the same and that there are no non-automobile travel trips. This new approach has given us a way to allocate those trips across specific modes, but we're still assuming that the total number of person trip activity for any one land use is the same, it's constant across urban contexts. Some of us have been wondering whether this is really accurate or whether different contexts might generate higher or lower person trips for any one land use. And we have a little bit of evidence to suggest that that might be true. For example, these are data summarized from a 2012 study of retail and service uses. These are all restaurants. You could see that as we move into more urban landscapes, we see a decrease in the person trips taken by automobile, which is expected. This is consistent with a lot of the behavioral theory. If we were to apply ITE's approximated person trip rates, we would estimate it right around the red line. And these are based on the 9th edition trip generation rates. So what we would see, and sort of the lessons we would take away from these data, are that what we would largely be missing by taking this approach, at least for restaurants, are underestimating the total amount of person trip activities, which means we'd probably be mostly underestimating walk trips and things like that. Similarly, this is a comparison from a really recent data collection looking at subsidized affordable housing sites in California. I'm comparing it with the converted method using ITE's apartment 220 rate. And we see that the person trip rates that we're gathering from these sites are quite a bit higher than what we would estimate from ITE's approach. We would expect them to be a lot closer, even though we're comparing subsidized and market rate housing. From sort of subsequent multivariate analysis, we're seeing that 2 indicators play a big role in this variation. The size of the dwelling unit, so the larger dwelling units for these multifamily subsidized affordable housing sites means more people per household living in them. As well as retail density. So higher rates of retail density nearby increase the total amount of AM person trip activity around the site. What this suggests is that while the approximated method helps us move towards multimodal approaches sooner, we still don't know a lot about what generates behavior, what generates activity for different land uses. And this is really an area of interest for a lot of people studying this. Another big change from the 10th edition trip generation manual was a move towards some context-specific place types. They have 4 general place types. They also have an overlay with whether or not it's near transit. A lot of this comes from all of those studies that were collected before, but with an interest in keeping it simple for practitioners, so not adding a ton of multivariate continuous data, keeping it sort of simple in these buckets. I have a feeling that this will change and evolve just as more data is collected and a better understanding of multimodal behavior is developed. Similar, they decided to decommission data prior to 1980. This was probably one of the most surprising things that came out of this because they've been fairly hesitant in removing data. We know, so this is 9th edition data. This is the 2 data back. ITE gave me some access to it, and I started plotting things like the age of the data. It's a pretty big cut to take away data from 1980 and before. Some of my findings looking at the age of data for retail and service uses indicate that really we should be removing a lot more data, keeping it a lot more recent. Part of that is because we have observed quite a bit of changes in the transportation and information sectors. It also has to do, it's an artifact of our interest in collecting data from different sites. So we have a lot of suburban data. A lot of the newer data in the past almost 40 years have been looking less towards the non-bike, non-walk, non-transit environments. We really haven't been able to capture that with the place type since then. The last change that is really worth mentioning here is they did some reconfiguration with some of the land uses. The apartments, the multifamily apartment codes have been cleaned up a little bit. They removed that 220 general apartment code, and wherever possible, they put that data into the intensity-specific apartment codes. They've also added data with first floor, bottom floor commercial retail, which was a pretty big move. In the U.S., we're starting to see recreational marijuana, so that was marijuana dispensaries was a very big addition to this list. The data that the land uses that they removed were partially because they decommissioned older data, so there was no longer data that were relevant, and partially because they started seeing very different land uses. So DVD video rental stores really don't exist, and at least they're not growing in the U.S. An interesting point to make about all these new land uses they've added. In another analysis, looking specifically at the 9th edition handbook data, I plotted and looked at the retail service land uses. So that top left graphic you're seeing are all the 67 land use data for retail and service that ITE provided in the 9th edition. I found that a simplified taxonomy really captures something like 90% of the variation that the 67 categories, but it's a lot less expensive to maintain. So we can continue to update and collect new data, but we wouldn't have to collect as much data, and we can add quite a few multivariate things like the urban context place type, the type of transit that's accessible, maybe market area demographics, things like that. So just by adding new land uses, that could be really useful to understand how those things are different, but it's a lot more expensive to maintain. So having more land uses does not necessarily mean you're getting better predictive strength. Just something to think about as you're sort of refining your land use categories that you'd be interested in using. I love to call out recent and ongoing and future work. For those of you who are interested, many of these will be available either soon or in the nearby future. I mentioned the California DOT project looking at subsidized affordable housing. One of the big things that we found there was that parking supply was highly significant in our vehicle trip models, which is something that it will be carried forward in another Caltrans study looking at linking parking supply and vehicle demand for California. Tabitha Cahomes and Noreen McDonald are doing some really fascinating stuff looking at all the techniques and innovations that agencies can adopt in their transportation impact analysis guidelines. It sort of gives you this sense or gives you more tools to think about how, trip generation data is expensive, but there are a lot of different ways that you can look at tailoring guidelines for your specific region. Kelly Clifton from Portland State University will be launching a new multifamily data collection in urban areas this fall. And from Melbourne, de Gruyter just recently published an international synthesis of multimodal trip generation methods. I provided that and other references that I've mentioned here in this area. You're all welcome to email me. I'll be traveling throughout the summer, so I might be slow to respond, but I love to talk about trip generation and similar types of methods for practice. Thank you, and I hope to hear from you.
Thank you. Those are some great perspectives from academia, and now we're going to hear from industry. Our last speakers for this evening are Ms. Kirsten and Mr. Martin Rowland with Arup. Kirsten has 15 years' experience in private industry after receiving her Bachelor of Engineering Civil degree from the University of Queensland. Kirsten's career is focused on transport planning and traffic engineering, contributing to a range of multidisciplinary infrastructure projects across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Across her career with Arup, she has been involved in the development of route networks for the London 2012 Olympic site within the UK. Since moving to Melbourne, she's worked on a variety of interchange design projects associated with station upgrades, level crossing removals, and airport landside operations. She's joined tonight by Mark Rowland. Mark has over 15 years of local and international experience in the public sector and private industry after receiving his Bachelor of Commerce in Transport and Logistics Management. Mark is also passionate about postgraduate studies, having completed a postgraduate diploma in transport at Monash University here in Victoria. Mark's career has been focused on transport and cities planning, most recently with intelligent mobility and the ability of applying the movement and place framework. His career journey began in New Zealand as a fleet manager and operator, then on to Transport for London, where he worked on setting up legible London pedestrian wayfinding system, nice tongue twister, and his Boris bikes before moving to senior management position here locally with Big Roads and now joining Arup. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kirsten and Mark Rowland.
Thanks very much. It's going to be a two-part presentation, so I will go first. I'll just put my timer on, because I tend to sometimes go a little bit over. So when Michael asked myself to present today, what I thought I would do, we hear a lot about movement in place now. It was actually, as I was doing the presentation last night, somebody walked up behind me and said, isn't that just a buzzword and just another way of kind of, are you actually getting on and doing stuff? And I said, well, actually, I changed the presentation at that moment in time. But what I'll do is actually just give you some my perspectives and things that I'm learning live on projects that you'll be able to take away. One of the things I just wanted to notice around the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we've signed up to, and I think it's really important, and that's why I picked the term outcome-led design. This is a really important way of tackling some of the world's challenges at the moment, if we can achieve and address some of these goals. Recently I was in Singapore, and one of the things that I noticed quite often is people kept talking to me when I was saying, talking about the economy in Singapore, and they always talk about their people. Their people are their resource. They have absolutely, I don't want to say absolutely nothing, but they've got a lot of material things, but they can't go and dig a hole. They can't go and sell some gold. And I think when we remind ourselves as transport planners and traffic engineers and place planners that our competitive advantage globally is our livability, and that is why people come here and work. And as transport planners, and we think about our streets, is how can we support that. As Michael just mentioned, one of the things I originally did when I first started with Vic Roads was working with Andrew Wall and Co to develop the Smart Roads framework. So when we developed that, we thought, yep, we've solved the world's problems. We've got network operations planning. Everybody's going to love us. We're going to change all the roads and streets, and we've solved the issues. What became quite evident quite quickly is scale. So network operations planning or smart roads is very much at a network scale. It is very much about thinking about curb to curb, or what do we do with that road space, and trying to pick winners. There's been some successes. Maroondah Highway in Ringwood, Bayswater, with the new station upgrade. In terms of prioritising vehicles around the network, Melbourne is looked at as a great case example. So I don't want to take too much away from that. But as Victorians, we continue to lead the world, and this is where movement in place sort of comes into. And I'll talk about it a little bit now. Do have to congratulate the Department of Transport, previously Transport Victoria. The movement in place framework is now up online. I won't go into it too much, but just in terms of some of the thoughts that I've had. Look, it is a process, and when the engineering side of my brain kicks in, you think process, if I follow the process, it will give you the answer at the end. I think it's really important that as we apply movement in place as practitioners, we are very contextual. You might use bits of the process, you might ignore bits of the process, but what's really important is design thinking in terms of bringing all the people together. One of the predictions I have, and I'll talk a little bit about it now, is this movement towards street design, street principles and design thinking. A lot of people are already using it. We're starting to use it a lot more and more, particularly at the street scale. So we talk a lot more about accessibility planning now. So we talk about the 60-minute city, how many jobs and opportunities can I reach within 60 minutes. We talk about precincts or national economic employment clusters. What's that 30-minute catchment? But really, when we start to get down to the street design, what is the principles at that 5 minute? What are we expecting to see? Trees, wide footpaths, starting to get down to that scale. One of the areas I do have to shout out to is Auckland. I think where Auckland's gone, they followed us with network operations plans, but they've kind of jumped ahead of us, particularly with their roads and streets network and their street design guidelines. What's really important about this stuff is it's now embedded in statutory planning. So when people are developing properties, they need to be aware of the street that they're on and start to meet some of those principles. One of the things, this is out of the New Zealand guide, but this is my prediction that we'll see more and more of this. At the moment we have Austroads guides, and they've done us well, but really starting to get down to what are those individual outcomes and principles are we looking for at the street? What is the design intent? You notice that image on the right doesn't tell you how wide the footpath is or how wide the lanes are. Really, it's up to people as practitioners, engineers and urban designers to take those principles and outcomes and then design the street contextual for each location. One of the things I did want to sort of touch on here in Victoria at the moment, our road toll is now 60% bigger than it was last year. So we're standing at 142 today. Last year it was 88. The road toll in Australia is now the biggest killer of people under the age of 10, second biggest killer of people under the age of 25. And one of the days, I did the statistics yesterday, over my life period, the city of Shepparton has been killed. And we've probably seen nearly 2 million people hospitalised over that period. So as practitioners, we have a crisis on our roads and streets, where a lot of Australians have been killed. And really what I want to highlight is movement in place and the safe systems approach go hand in hand. They're not opposite. Road safety is not competing against operations and places not competing. A lot of the times, one of the things I saw the other day is a mapping of the road statistics against those street types. Really, really interesting once you start to see the types of accidents that are happening on city collectors and city boulevards and starting to kind of understand it from that perspective. I did say this before in terms of NACDO, in the US, ITE did a lot of design guides and they weren't really fitting purpose. So, people like Janet said it can in New York. Street Fights, a great book if you feel like some nighttime reading. So NACDO's come out and really pushed people to change. And I just took the screenshot of ITE today, and you're actually seeing a reflection now. So ITE, if you look at this guide that's just released on the 1st of May, healthy living, sustainable travel, and the role of complete streets. So in some ways, what I like to see is we'll see a change in Austroads, and potentially if we don't, then departments and councils will come up with their own design guidelines. What's really important about NACDO, which is really important for me, is it is evidence-based. So I was talking to my colleagues, Margaret Newman, who worked for DOT in New York at the time, and she was part of doing this under Janet, and that is all evidence-based. It's not made up. It's really important to recognise that that was written by traffic engineers and is now being applied. I think one of the things just here, I suppose one of the things I wanted to touch on there was around outcome-led design. So one of the ways that we're developing or applying the Sustainable Development Goals to roads and streets is that diagram on the front. We've come up with our own framework. But I think it's really kind of explains movement in place as well. So those strategic drivers, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and then the interventions and metrics. These are some of the things that we're doing currently. We do a lot of workshops, and I'll talk about that when I see the photos. A lot of design thinking or charrettes now are really important in Victoria about redesigning those streets. And again, technology analysis. So this is a design tool using GIS to assess street changes and how they meet those UN Sustainable Development Goals. So hopefully we might see that start to move towards movement in place. As a accredited investment logic mapper and person who writes business cases, those are just a bit of my own thinking and how we go about applying movement in place in the project or business case lifecycle. So feel free to steal and feel free to criticise me if it's not correct. But I suppose what you're looking at there is thinking about how do we take the Transport Integration Act, and again when I was talking about that scale size, so again are we talking at a street scale, a precinct scale or a city scale? And then starting to think around what are those metrics and indicators, again, that outcome-led design. And then starting to think around where does the investment logic map sit, how do we get those interventions, but most of it important is then we finally get to the solution away at the top and in post-evaluation. So I really want to push the importance of post-evaluation, and also I'd love to see more business cases in Victoria with movement in place principles embedded, particularly in the language used. Just a couple more I wanted just to touch on before I hand over to Kirsten. Don't want to plug us too much, but one of the things that, when we were going into doing the work for Infrastructure Victoria about, autonomous vehicles and zero emissions vehicles, is we went through and we wrote 200 pages in 6 weeks. And I thought, yeah, we've done the job, we've earned our consultancy money. But at the end of the day, when we actually sort of sat down and reflected on all this work, I found this kind of interesting thing from the US. It was actually from the US Army. It was what they call VUCA, and it kind of helped me sort of think around what really should we be doing for AVs and ZEVs or zero emissions vehicles in Victoria. And so with the US Army, they talked about volatility. If you've got a situational scenario where it's volatile, you're very uncertain, it's very complex, there's a lot of ambiguity, which is essentially AVs. There is, every day there's a different article. We don't know whether Elon Musk has got his driverless vehicle yet or not. But then really, how do you kind of address that situation? So you really need a really good vision. You really need to have a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve. You need some clarity so that we're all talking about the same thing and trying to achieve the same thing. And we've got adaptability and flexibility so we can change over time. And then we're like, yes, that's right. We need a master transport plan for Victoria, but we also really need a good movement in place framework. And then you can start to see some of those recommendations come out of IV, and just the ones about the 6 there out of the IV final recommendations report. You can see how many of those would link to movement in place. Starting to think about those street design principles, how we future-proof, how we build in resilience, how we build in adaptability, and how we integrate new transport options. Just thinking about that as well. So some of the last couple of slides, last couple of things, I suppose these are some of the kind of questions I always ask myself in the head. I've kind of changed my way of thinking in terms of the hierarchy. So starting to think around what is the desired built form, or what is the desired built form of that land use and space? What is the significance of that place? What are the strategic drivers? Then start to think around what is the move, going back to, I suppose, old school, what is the movement, form and function? So that's the stuff we taught back at Monash years ago about, is it a collector or an arterial? So what is the form of function? And then what is the significance of that road to our state? And then going through and thinking about what is the gap or how is it currently operating, and then thinking about what is the solution. So just one of the things every morning, I love watching this piece of road. So from a movement point of view, Collins Street outside Southern Cross, the most important location in Victoria in my mind, the centre, the heart of Victoria. So we've got this movement corridor. Yes, we've separated out the trams. We've got some good curb there. We've put a Wurundjeri Way under there. And then we sit there and we have a bit of a think. So we've got a good staggered T there, so to make sure it's safety, pedestrians don't worry about it. I feel like there is I like the sight and the sea has a killers going through there, but I do like these people that walk into the traffic as the signal goes green. So it's now green. So I just, I think from a place point of view, if we were thought about the most significant place in Victoria, what perspective or what way would we have designed that if we had been out at a workshop? So, look, I'm not sure what the crash history is, but that gentleman decided he's just run into pedestrian fencing. So it becomes quite comical in the morning to watch how people interact with this space. We decided to sort of Monash neck, so we decided to do a bit of a workshop. So this is the walking route between Clayton Station, which is recommended, and Monash University, our second biggest employment area. So lovely. So I don't want these to be name or shame, but I do just think you just reminds you to get out from behind your desk. And the last one I'll leave you on, again, one of our biggest cultural icons in Victoria, which is the Melbourne Market. Which you can see just over there in the corner. So, I counted the lanes on Victoria's Parade the other day, and there's technically 2 lanes in there, so we'll call it 9. So we've got a 9-lane highway, Hill Street just outside there. And, the function of Victoria Street in terms of connecting Footscray with Richmond, or that through traffic function is now left. What kind of place should that be? And it does just, remind us as, what would the crash history be on there? What is that future role? So I just start to sort of think, what is the place we want and bring it back? So I'll hand over, hopefully I didn't go too far over, but I'll hand over to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm just going to go through a bit of a case study with Ringwood, the Ringwood Station Upgrade Project. It was based on smart roads and went through and obviously made significant changes in that area. So I'll just go through and kind of describe a little bit about what the project was, but then revisit on how it might have changed or what some of the outcomes may have been had movement in place been in effect at that time and had more of a focus on place rather than just the movement. So just a little bit of context in the area, some of you might be quite familiar with it. So Ringwood, the station upgrade itself was driven quite strongly by a master plan out there to try and revitalise the Ringwood activities area. So that's been defined by Plan Melbourne as one of the metropolitan activity centres, so very important. There was already a significant train station out there with a couple of routes, but most important was the bus routes that came in to join those services, so a very big interchange and transferring of passenger type thing. Lots of different land uses around that area, so there's residential, there's commercial, lots of retail, and then the community type facilities as well. So I guess there was also the realisation that there might be some development opportunities in that area. And then another very strong driver was improving road safety and pedestrian safety, probably particularly for pedestrians in this area, given the land uses on either side of Maroondah Highway specifically. So I mentioned this before, Ringwood is noted at Melbourne as a metropolitan activity centre. So the objectives of the project, I guess, was to improve the transport connectivity and try and make that intermodal transport hub, minimising the travel and distance between transfers and improve the connectivity between those. There was also a desire to provide better facilities and connections for active transport in that area, which is very important, and so there was provisions for that. Then there was quite a strong desire to have a boulevard impact on Maroondah Highway to really pedestrianise that, calm the traffic in that area, and that was also somewhat driven by Plan Melbourne as well, and consideration of that. Then it was also trying to make sure that the station itself integrated with the forecourt integrated with the land uses around it, and the activities that were going on there. In particular, given there was quite a large expansion of the Eastland Shopping Centre across the road, so an opportunity to really bolster that up, I suppose. So I mentioned before, the project itself was, it kind of ran under the smart roads type framework at that point. So very much focused on what the transport connections were, and what they could achieve, how could they make that more efficient. So I've just put up here the smart roads map from 2010 initially. So you can see there that it was identified that there was quite a lot of pedestrian priority required in the vicinity of the station itself on Maroondah Highway. With the great connections that the area has to the freeways, so Eastlink and the Eastern Freeway there, it's an opportunity to transfer through traffic outside of Maroondah Highway and get it off that main area that you wanted to activate more. Then, as I mentioned before, lots of bus routes feeding into the train station there and providing access to the suburbs further out that maybe don't have direct access to a train station. So lots of bus priority routes. Interestingly, once the bicycle network was reviewed, the bicycle network, it was identified that there was also a need for a bicycle priority route there as well. So providing that active transport connection which was quite lucky in this instance, given there was the Ringwood to Box Hill rail trail. So an opportunity there to provide that link and take it as a parallel route from Maroondah Highway to try and reduce some of the competitive nature of the cross-section, I suppose. So this is just I'll just jump straight into like moving place considerations now. So this is just a couple of images on the difference between what the precinct was, or the station forecourt and Maroondah Highway, before and after the station upgrade occurred. So you can see there, in the previous one, there was obviously within the cross-section available, it was predominantly vehicle-based allocation to the road space there. 3 lanes of traffic in each direction, still pedestrian footpaths, but not really focused on, not trying to bolster that activity there. Once the station and the upgrade in that area came in, you see within the same cross-section of space, there was a shift to try and promote pedestrian access, activity, the priority. So you can see there's the raised threshold signalised crossing then. So really signifying and having those visual cues for drivers that was happening. Reduction in the lanes there, so gone from 3 more down to 2 in each direction, and then the provision of an on-road cycle lane. So that just supplements the shared use path on the rail trail, sort of one block backwards there. Another interesting feature, I think, in just the difference in those two is the landscaping treatment and the greenery in that area, to try and, I guess, bolster it more as a space that people would want to go to, activate it, and move around there. So if we think of it from at the time, Smart Roads was all focused on movement, it's probably actually achieved a lot of the priorities that they wanted to get out of that. So reduce the traffic in this, or through traffic within this area of road, and maximise the opportunities for pedestrians to have more space there. But interestingly, because it focused on the movement and there wasn't really that framework to think more about what the place was and what you might want that place to be in the future, so building towards a strategy. Along the edges of Maroondah Highway there, the structures are quite closed off. So they provide a bit of a barrier, and there's not really any area that's activated just along that frontal there. So you've got on the southern side, you've got the escalators to the station, and on the north side, there's the buildings there leading into Eastland. So still quite open, and there's a forecourt to the shopping centre, but maybe some opportunities there to go to do something else. So if movement in place had been in at the time that we were doing it, or looking back on it now, I guess one of the big things would actually be considering that area from a place perspective. So these are just some of the questions that we might have actually wanted to pose to that to determine what we would want that area to be like in the future, and how might that have changed the decisions we made on the cross-section and the space allocation. So a big one of that would be who's travelling there and how long are they willing to go there? So what's the importance of it? Are people actually willing to travel into there? How is it used? Is it a workplace? Is it for visitors to pass through? Do people live there? Is it a combination of all of those? And you'd probably say that Activity Centre of Ringwood is a combination of all of those, particularly as lots of people are coming in there to transfer elsewhere. And then what are the types of activity that are occurring along that frontage there on the road? So then just moving a bit more into, if we were to think about what Maroondah Highway and the place around the area we might want it to be like. You might class it to be around the regional significance type role. It's connected quite well with some municipalities on either side, neighbouring ones, that would come in. There's a lot of activity, community facilities, recreational facilities in the area, so it's something you might want to do. So this is just a bit of an example, or shows what some of the successful examples are of some of those different place things, those areas and locations where maybe they could do a bit more. So you can see so you can see some of the ones like Elizabeth and Victoria Street, which is similar to what Mark was mentioning before, that there's probably an opportunity there that you could really put a focus more on what the place is and what we want it to be. So if we were considering that with Ringwood Station right now and how it might have changed that, some of the things that I think may have been considered more is, do we actually want that much traffic to go through that space if we want it to be a significant place that people want to go to? Would we want to reduce that any further? Would we want to actually further promote the cycle lanes in that area? So increase the road safety for those users, and potentially you might still keep the 2 lanes, but maybe one of those lanes would be a bus lane only, which means then you don't need the dedicated space of the stops on the side to make sure that they can have independent interaction while they go. So providing additional footpath width and activation space on the side where you might be able to change what you actually have there in your place, kind of thing. So if with some of those considerations and things, I guess there's a number of different things that could change for communities in that space. So the accessibility to facilities, the ability for people to access them and act on those, which might in turn change the economy, increased employment, increase people spending money in those areas, and just the general amenity and safety in that way. So I guess it was, more of a thought of what are some of the things that we could have done or we could do differently in ongoing projects, where the focus is more then about the place initially, and then the movement aspects following it, rather than primarily basing on the movement aspects. And this is just a diagram of what potentially, an option might be, not necessarily the best one from a place perspective, but just a different one depending on how things change in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark and Kirsten. So we'll have some time for a few quick questions. So if the speakers want to come up and share. So I'll get Michael to help me just, we'll use the microphone for anyone asking a question. You might have a loud voice, but just at least then we can all hear you. And if I could ask, we don't have too much time because we've got drinks and some food waiting for us. So if you could keep your questions nice and short, that would be appreciated. Cool. Nick, up the back.
I just want to ask David a question. I think you said that. Yeah. I know a David Rowland, and I keep David.
I can meet David.
I keep getting David Rowland, who's on my committee, mixed up with Mark Rowland. Sorry, Mark. I keep doing it. I thought you said that the American. Look, I've been in the business for a long time, and in terms of traffic and safety, we've always been ahead of the US, and I've been over there looking for ideas like 20 years ago, come away thinking, they can't teach us anything. But did you put up a slide saying that they're ahead of us in some way, like in safety and traffic management, the way they treat these? What your slide seemed to imply that the ITE standard.
I think what I was just trying to imply is it's been really great to see the ITE, the ITE's culture change in America, to start seeing things like that real change in complete streets. So I'm not going to argue who's ahead of who, but I think what we're going to see, my prediction is we're going to see a lot more street design manuals, either either at a local level or a state level, potentially across. Auckland's already gone. We're likely to see a lot of, South Australia's got theirs. Who knows whether or not City Melbourne will design, develop their own street design guidelines. So I think that's just what I'm sort of predicting.
You think Australia's not doing enough?
I think Austroads, my opinion on Austroads is it is a fantastic repository of evidence-based research, but in some ways it's going to be difficult. It'd be difficult for them to create an ACTA guide type style. So we're going to see. That's my prediction. So no, I'm not. Please don't. I'm not criticising.
Okay, it's up to us, guys.
Cool, thanks.
I'll do the on your behalf. I think in terms of land use transport integration, we've got a lot to learn from the US, so we can chat about that. I just wanted to clarify, you mentioned scale, the difference between smart roads and movement of place. Do you mean vehicles versus people? Is that what you were referring to in terms of scale?
I think more scale so when we're talking about network, like when we talk about network approach or the network scale, we use things like level of service. So we might be talking about, if you were doing the dart buses if you were planning or making improvements along the dart buses from Doncaster to the CBD, your level of service for buses or the way you would look at that, but then at the street scale, you're down at a person scale or a people scale. So then you might be thinking, do I really want buses running next to a footpath? Because it's noisy and there's diesel and and it changes the whole atmosphere of that place. So I think sometimes when we're having conversations, practitioners, we are having this conversation, we're talking about completely different scales. Like I'm talking about a scale of trees, we're talking about Sydney Road the other day, and I'm not sure about getting rid of cars, having cars that close to the footpath, walking along with a 3-year-old child, do I really want, but those parked cars are a barrier, and they stop the noise and they stop the child from running out on the road. So sometimes, we've got to make sure we're talking on a scale.
And I guess that facilitates that design thinking approach and justifying it, because it's a bit atypical, isn't it, to justify a cost-benefit analysis based on a design approach rather than a number.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Hi, I'm John Marori. Actually, I come from a different angle. I'm a neurologist, but I've also got a degree in environmental science, in fact, a higher degree in that than medicine. But what occurred to me was the health aspects of your planning, because that has huge consequences, avoiding dementia and other risk factors, and also the impact on various health facilities that you'll need if people exercise more, just getting to and from where they want to go. So that's active transport, and I'm sure you're all very out of favour of that. And I feel very sorry for you because the future's not coming in a linear manner. It must be terribly hard to predict what's actually going to happen in the future, because you're advising governments about infrastructure that's going to last half a century or more. And in half a century, goodness knows what the conditions will be and what the technology will be. The only constants, I guess, are human beings. You'll still be walking, cycling perhaps. And I notice also that shading is becoming more of an issue for you. And the choice of species and all that's a huge area. I just want to know, are these things being asked by the people that are asking for reports? In other words, when the government, when the Department of Transport wants to hear from a consultant, do they want to hear about these other issues?
So I think definitely in the last few years, the bigger projects, there's been a shift in how much emphasis is put on landscape, architecture and public realm and the coordination of all those. So it's not just about moving people and getting them to change within the different ways that they're going through, but it's about making them feel part of the space and making sure that it's amenable as they go through it. So that has definitely been from the large multi-disc projects I've been on. Rather than the landscape architects or any of those other types of variables coming in at the end as like the extra thoughts that you make something pretty, they're actually a really important part of it now, and we have to mould the design to be able to take account of all those different things, not just the level of standard, the level of service, or the degree of saturation or how it's operating.
Just another point of view, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Uber Elevate. So this is a concept that Uber are spruiking, which will involve drones, but with humans in them, that you can take a drone up in the air. I don't know how prepared we are for that. And on, I think Tuesday or Wednesday next week, they're going to announce a third city where they want to trial this, and Melbourne is, I believe, one of 6 cities. So Melbourne could be one of the cities, and it sounds crazy, but it could be a reality. And I think we're very far from thinking about things going around in the sky, and it may actually become a reality. So, yeah.
Hi, Mariana Richards. I'm an ITE-ANZ board member, but also president for all my sins of the Town and Country Planning Association. So the previous question is quite relevant to the work of the association in terms of health impacts and some of the work that we've actually been sponsoring students undertaking at University of Melbourne in terms of understanding the transport corridor or urban heat island impacts and also the health impacts. And one of the common learnings we've had over the last 3 years is an incredible dearth of research in that area in terms of understanding what either it's air emissions or whether it's building structure types. And this is going to, I quite agree, it's going to become increasingly important. However, my question relates in terms of what the panel has presented. None of you have really talked about how the key decision makers have responded to the sort of work and the ideas that you're floating, and noting that in sort of transport and land use contexts, there are multi-layers of decision makers who can influence, and perhaps just comment in terms of the work you've been talking about on how the decision-making processes have influenced your thinking about going forward.
Yeah, great questions. I suppose, one of the things I can't agree with you more, I think that's why, when I had that diagram up there about the business case processes around, BCRs on travel time improvements out of the Citroen model, is that really where we sort of got to? Really, at the end of the day, that's why I sort of, put that first slide up, really about agglomeration and economics. We know all the great cases about jobs and employment. And that's why I think, again, moving in place and why I'm so passionate about it is that, through the business case processes, how do we try and drive that argument to a much higher level and get away from a 1.01 BCR based on, travel time. So I think that's really important. I think just to touch on the health thing, I think, again, as I was mentioning about young people, the amount of young people with asthma along major road corridors, it's alarming, but it's not sort of up there. And so one of the things I would have to say for the DOT is that one of the good things about movement in place, just to highlight again in the framework, is they have got movement in place safety and environment. So they are, they have put those things in there around nitrous oxide and CO2. So at least the conversations now being had and being put up. Yes, and Uber, yeah, so yes, you'll like to see some things on Tuesday. I think that's as much as I can say.
In terms of decision making, I understand the Department of Transport are revising their public transport guidelines for land use and development at the moment. So they were put together in 2008, and they're pretty interested in some of the ideas around quantifying vehicle trips by each transport mode and new development. So some of that hopefully will, I don't know to what extent, but more make its way into those guidelines. So there's interest there, but how far it actually goes, I don't know. But it is good that they're revising. They're going to be revising those guidelines because they are 10 years old. So, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Okay, do you have another question anyone I'd like to ask? No? Great, alright, well we might wrap it up. I might get Michael to come up and make a couple of final remarks. Speakers, if you're great.
Alright, one item not on the agenda, I'd just like to acknowledge the effort of Laura Aston, who's done an incredible job putting together a lot of these events in the past. Due to some other commitments, she's handed the torch on, and we truly appreciate all the support and effort that she gave us during preparing for tonight's event, so thank you. Again, on behalf of ITE-ANZ, thanks again for coming along to this evening's presentation. We'd like to thank our speakers, Gruyter, Kristie, Currans, Kirsten and Mark Rowland. We also want to acknowledge PwC who are hosting us tonight. There are great beverages and food to enjoy back at the end after we finish. We have our next IT event scheduled for August, a date still to be determined. As early as this morning, we may have secured a speaker from the US to give us a couple of ideas on his involvement with ITE, among other things. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate all your effort.